I stared at the gaping hole in my bedroom floor where my safe used to be hidden beneath the loose floorboard. My hands trembled as I knelt down, running my fingers along the empty space that had once contained $230,000 in federal Treasury securities. 8 years of careful saving from my government salary gone. Behind me, footsteps creaked on the old wooden stairs. I turned to see my younger sister, Sarah, standing in the doorway clutching a stack of official papers against her chest, that familiar smirk spreading across her face like poison. The morning sunlight streaming through my childhood bedroom window felt mockingly cheerful as I processed what had just happened. Sarah leaned against the doorframe with the casual confidence of someone who believed they held all the cards. The federal Treasury bonds in her hands represented every sacrifice I had made since starting my job as a Treasury Department analyst at age 20. Living with our parents to save money, skipping vacations, driving my beat-up Honda Civic instead of buying something newer, all so I could participate in the employee securities purchase program that allowed government workers to buy bonds at favorable rates. "Found your little savings," Sarah taunted, waving the papers like victory flags. "Thanks for the college fund." My stomach dropped as the full weight of her words hit me. These were not just savings bonds that any citizen could purchase at a bank. These were Series Loan savings bonds and Treasury inflation-protected securities available exclusively to federal employees, each one registered with my Social Security number and requiring specific documentation to redeem. The theft of government securities was not merely a family dispute over money. It was a federal crime. "Sarah, you do not understand what you have taken," I said, my voice barely steady. "Those bonds are registered government securities. You cannot just cash them like a personal check." She rolled her eyes with the dismissive attitude that had characterized her approach to consequences since childhood. "Money is money, Becca. Besides, Mom and Dad think it is about time you shared some of your wealth with the family." The sound of our parents' voices drifted up from the kitchen below, and I caught fragments of their conversation. Mom's voice carried that proud tone she usually reserved for Sarah's accomplishments, while Dad's deeper rumble expressed approval about something involving college expenses and smart financial planning. My heart sank as I realized they were not just aware of the theft, but were actively celebrating it. I followed Sarah downstairs, my bare feet silent on the familiar creaky steps I had navigated thousands of times during my childhood in this modest 3-bedroom house in suburban Virginia. The kitchen smelled of coffee and the cinnamon rolls Mom always made the morning after Thanksgiving. But the comforting aroma now felt like a betrayal of the warmth and security I had always associated with this space. "There she is," Dad announced as I entered the kitchen, his tone carrying an edge of confrontation that I had rarely heard directed at me. "We were just discussing Sarah's college plans." Mom turned from the stove where she was flipping pancakes, her graying brown hair pulled back in the messy bun that signaled she was in full domestic mode. "Honey, your father and I have been talking, and we think it is wonderful that Sarah found your hidden money. We had no idea you were hoarding so much cash while we have been struggling with the mortgage payments." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. For the past 6 months, I had been living in my childhood bedroom after a kitchen fire in my apartment building had displaced all the tenants. During that time, I had contributed $800 monthly toward household expenses, helped with grocery shopping, and even paid for Dad's prescription medications when his insurance had coverage gaps. The idea that I was hoarding money while my family struggled was so far from reality that I struggled to find words to respond. "Mom, I have been paying rent and helping with expenses," I managed to say. "And those bonds are not just hidden money. They are federal government securities that I purchased through my job. Sarah cannot legally redeem them." Dad set down his coffee mug with enough force to make the liquid slosh over the rim. "Legal, illegal. What difference does it make? You live under our roof, eat our food, and squirrel away hundreds of thousands of dollars while your sister cannot afford college tuition. Family takes care of family, Becca." "I gave her the combination to your safe 3 months ago," Mom added as if she were discussing the weather. We have been watching you sneak around hiding money like some kind of miser. Sarah needs that money for her education." The revelation that my parents had betrayed my trust so completely left me speechless for several seconds. 3 months ago, I had noticed small items disappearing from my room. A silver bracelet that had belonged to our grandmother, a $20 bill I had left on my dresser, even some expensive skincare products I had purchased for myself as a rare splurge. When I had quietly installed the floor safe and changed the combination on my old jewelry box, I had thought I was protecting myself from random theft. I had never imagined that my own parents were facilitating it. Sarah has been planning this for months. I realized aloud the pieces of her behavior finally making sense. All those conversations about my selfishness, about how I think I am better than the family because I work for the government. Sarah's smirk widened. I just helped them see what was obvious to everyone else. You act like you are some kind of saint living here temporarily, but really you were just using us as a free place to live while you built your little treasure hoard. I have been living here because my apartment building burned down, I protested. The insurance company is still processing claims. This was supposed to be temporary. Temporary or not? Dad interrupted. You should have been contributing more to this family instead of stuffing money into a safe like some kind of paranoid survivalist. The unfairness of their accusations was breathtaking, but what terrified me more was their complete ignorance of what Sarah had actually stolen. Dad, you need to understand something. Those securities are not regular savings bonds. They are special government instruments that require federal investigation when they are reported stolen. If Sarah tries to cash them, she already has, Mom said proudly. Called 3 different banks yesterday to ask about the process. My blood turned to ice water in my veins. If Sarah had already contacted financial institutions about redeeming federal securities that were not registered in her name, she had likely triggered automatic alerts in the Treasury Department's fraud detection systems. Every inquiry about government bonds is tracked and cross-referenced with the registered owner's information. By now, her calls were probably flagged for investigation. Which banks? I asked, my voice tight with growing panic. First National Community Trust, and that big one downtown with the marble columns, Sarah replied casually. Do not worry, I did not mention your name. I figured I would just say I inherited them. The room began to spin slightly as the full scope of the disaster became clear. Sarah had not only stolen federal securities, but she had also attempted to commit fraud by misrepresenting her legal right to redeem them. Inheritance claims required death certificates and probate documentation. When the banks requested proof that she had never been able to provide, they would have recorded the attempted fraudulent redemption. Sarah, you have committed multiple federal crimes, I said quietly. Theft of government property, attempted fraud, and possibly identity theft if you use my information in any way. She laughed a sharp sound that echoed off the kitchen walls. You are being dramatic. Family does not prosecute family. You would never actually turn me in. But as I looked at my younger sister holding documents worth more than most people earned in 4 years, treating federal crimes like a minor family squabble, I realized that everything I thought I knew about my family was built on a foundation of willful ignorance and favoritism that had enabled Sarah's sense of entitlement to grow into something dangerous. I excused myself from the increasingly hostile kitchen atmosphere and retreated to my room, where I sat on my narrow twin bed and stared at my phone for several minutes before making the call I knew would change everything. Marcus Thompson had been my colleague at the Treasury Department for 3 years, and his expertise in securities fraud made him the only person I could trust to explain exactly how deep Sarah had dug herself into legal trouble. Marcus, I need advice about a hypothetical situation involving stolen government securities. I began, but the tremor in my voice immediately betrayed that this was anything but theoretical. Becca, are you okay? You sound upset. I closed my bedroom door and lowered my voice. My sister took my bonds from my safe. Series I bonds and tips worth about $230,000. She contacted banks yesterday asking about redemption procedures. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly 10 seconds before Marcus responded. Becca, you need to understand something. Theft of federal securities carries a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 years in federal prison. If she attempted to redeem them using fraudulent information that adds conspiracy and identity fraud charges, we are talking about potential decades in prison. My hand started shaking as the reality of Sarah's situation became clear. She thinks this is just a family money dispute. She has no idea about federal sentencing guidelines. It gets worse. Marcus continued, his voice gentle but serious. Any attempt to redeem government securities triggers automatic alerts in our fraud detection system. If she contacted multiple banks yesterday, there are already flags in the system. The investigation starts automatically regardless of whether you file a complaint. I felt sick to my stomach as I realized that Sarah's fate might already be sealed not by my actions, but by her own reckless behavior and the automated systems designed to protect federal financial instruments. What happens now? The banking alerts go to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, which coordinates with the FBI and our internal investigation division. If she used any false information during her calls to the banks, or if she attempts to use forged documentation, they will trace her identity within days. Through my bedroom window, I could see Sarah in the backyard talking animatedly on her phone, with gestures that suggested she was making plans related to her newfound wealth. The sight filled me with a mixture of dread and desperate sadness for what was about to happen to my family. Marcus, there is something else. She mentioned inheritance claims. If she fabricated a story about inheriting the bonds— Federal fraud charges, Marcus interrupted. Becca, your sister has potentially committed at least 4 separate federal crimes. Even if she returns the bonds right now, the attempted redemption and false statements to financial institutions have already established a pattern of criminal behavior that prosecutors will not ignore. After I ended the call with Marcus, I sat in my room for nearly an hour listening to the sounds of my family downstairs, preparing for what they clearly believed would be a celebration of Sarah's financial windfall. The cognitive dissonance between their happiness and the federal investigation that was likely already beginning was almost overwhelming. When I finally went back downstairs, I found Sarah at the dining room table with her laptop open, surrounded by printouts from various financial websites. She had been researching bond redemption procedures and making notes about the most efficient ways to convert the securities into cash. "Find anything interesting?" I asked, sitting down across from her. "These bonds are even more valuable than I thought," she said excitedly. "Some of them have been accumulating interest for almost 8 years. When I cash them all in, I should have enough for 4 years of college tuition plus living expenses." "Sarah, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Those bonds are registered with my Social Security number and employment information. You cannot redeem them without committing identity theft." She waved her hand dismissively. "I will figure out the paperwork. How hard can it be?" "It is not about paperwork," I insisted. "Every government bond is tracked in federal databases. When you called those banks yesterday, you triggered security protocols that automatically generate investigation files." For the first time since I had discovered the empty safe, I saw a flicker of uncertainty cross Sarah's face. "What kind of investigation?" "The kind that involves FBI agents and federal prosecutors," I replied. "The kind that results in prison sentences measured in decades, not months." Sarah's confidence began to crack as she processed the implications of what I was telling her. "But you work for the Treasury Department. You can fix this, right?" "Tell them it was a misunderstanding." The naivety of her question revealed how completely she had misunderstood both my job and the seriousness of her actions. "Sarah, I analyze economic data and prepare reports. I do not have any authority over criminal investigations. Even if I did, I could not interfere with a federal case without committing crimes myself." "You would really let your own sister go to prison over money?" she asked, her voice rising with panic and indignation. "This is not about money," I replied firmly. This is about federal law. You stole government property and attempted to commit fraud. Those are not choices I made for you." Our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of our parents, who'd apparently been eavesdropping from the kitchen. Dad's face was flushed with anger, and Mom looked pale and worried for the first time since I had discovered the theft. "Becca, you are scaring your sister with all this talk about investigations and prison," Mom said, her voice shaking slightly. "Surely there is a way to handle this within the family." "The investigation is not something I can control," I explained. "It started automatically when Sarah contacted those banks. Federal computer systems flagged the inquiries, and the process is already in motion." Dad slammed his palm against the table, making Sarah's laptop bounce. "Then you better find a way to stop it. Family protects family, and if you let your sister get arrested over this, you are no daughter of mine." The ultimatum hung in the air like a toxic cloud poisoning what remained of the trust and love I had always felt in this house. My parents were asking me to choose between my moral obligations as a federal employee and my loyalty to a family that had betrayed my trust and enabled criminal behavior. "I cannot stop a federal investigation," I said quietly. "But even if I could, Sarah has not just stolen from me. She has stolen from the United States government. Those bonds represent taxpayer investments in national security and economic stability." "Do not give me some patriotic speech," Sarah snapped. "This is about you being vindictive because I outsmarted you." The word outsmarted crystallized something important for me. Sarah genuinely believed that theft and fraud were clever solutions to her problems rather than crimes that would destroy her future. Our parents had raised her to believe that rules and consequences applied to other people, not to our family. In enabling her behavior, they had set her up for the devastating fall that was now approaching with the inevitability of federal law enforcement. As I looked around the table at my family, I realized that my choice was not really between loyalty and justice. It was between enabling further destruction or accepting the painful consequences of years of willful blindness to Sarah's growing pattern of entitlement and illegal behavior. The next morning brought an unexpected gathering that felt more like an ambush than a family meeting. I woke up to the sound of multiple cars in our driveway and voices in the living room below. When I came downstairs, still in my pajamas and fuzzy slippers, I found our entire extended family assembled in what was clearly a coordinated intervention, designed to pressure me into protecting Sarah from the consequences of her actions. Uncle Robert sat in Dad's favorite recliner, his considerable bulk making the chair creak ominously. Aunt Patricia occupied the sofa next to my cousin Jennifer, and all three of them wore expressions of disappointment and concern that were clearly directed at me rather than at Sarah, who was nowhere to be seen. "There she is," Uncle Robert announced as I entered the room. "We need to have a serious conversation about family loyalty." I poured myself a cup of coffee from the pot Mom had prepared, buying time to process this unexpected development. Uncle Robert had driven 3 hours from Baltimore. Aunt Patricia had come from Richmond, and Jennifer had taken time off from her job at a real estate office in Norfolk. This was not a spontaneous visit. "Where is Sarah?" I asked. "She's upstairs, too upset to face everyone," Mom replied, her voice heavy with reproach. "She spent the night crying about how you are trying to destroy her future over money." Aunt Patricia leaned forward, her expression earnest and concerned. "Becca, honey, we understand you are upset about the money, but Sarah has explained the situation to us. Your grandmother always wanted the family inheritance to be shared equally among all the grandchildren." The mention of our grandmother, who had died 2 years earlier, sent a chill through me. "What inheritance are you talking about?" "The bonds," Jennifer chimed in. "Sarah told us that Grandma Rose left specific instructions that any money she had given to you was meant to be divided among all her grandchildren, not hoarded by one person." I stared at my cousin in disbelief. "Jennifer, those bonds were not inheritance money. I purchased them with my own salary over the past 8 years. Grandma Rose never had anything to do with them." Uncle Robert's expression hardened. Sarah showed us documents that prove otherwise. Legal papers indicating that the money came from your grandmother's estate. What documents? I demanded. Mom disappeared upstairs and returned with a folder containing what appeared to be official legal papers. As I examined them, my blood pressure began to rise. The documents were crude forgeries that claimed to be amendments to our grandmother's will, stating that money given to me during her lifetime was intended as a family trust fund rather than individual gifts. "These are fake," I said, pointing to several obvious discrepancies. "Look at the date formatting and the legal language. This is not how estate documents are written." "Sarah would not lie to us about something this important," Aunt Patricia protested. "She has always been honest about family matters." The irony of that statement was almost laughable, given Sarah's history of manipulation and dishonesty that our family had consistently ignored or excused. But as I looked around the room at their faces, I realized that Sarah had been preparing for this confrontation for weeks, possibly months. She had carefully constructed a narrative that painted me as a selfish hoarder of family money and herself as a victim trying to correct an injustice. "There is more," Uncle Robert continued. "Sarah told us about the medical bills and financial struggles the family has been facing while you kept hundreds of thousands of dollars hidden away." "What medical bills?" I asked, confused. "Patricia's cancer treatments," Mom explained. "Your aunt has been struggling with oncology bills that insurance would not cover. Sarah promised to help with the payments once she got access to the family money." I turned to stare at Aunt Patricia, who looked uncomfortable for the first time since the conversation began. "Aunt Patricia, I had no idea you were dealing with cancer. Why did not anyone tell me?" "We did not want to burden you," she replied quietly. "But when Sarah offered to help with the medical expenses, we thought it was generous of her to share the inheritance money." The manipulation was breathtaking in its scope and cruelty. Sarah had learned about our aunt's medical situation and used it as leverage to justify her theft, promising financial assistance that she could not legally provide while painting me as heartless for not sharing money that was not inheritance in the first place. "How much did she promise you?" I asked. $50,000, Aunt Patricia admitted, enough to cover the remaining balance on my treatment costs. I felt sick as I realized that Sarah had not only stolen from me, but had also made promises to vulnerable family members that would never be fulfilled. When the federal investigation progressed and the bonds were seized as evidence, Aunt Patricia would be left with her medical bills and the bitter disappointment of broken promises. "Jennifer, what did Sarah promise you?" I asked my cousin. She blushed and looked down at her hands. $25,000 for my wedding next spring. She said it would be a family gift from the inheritance fund. The wedding that Jennifer had been planning for 2 years, the dress she had already ordered, the venue deposits she had paid, all now depended on money that did not exist and promises that could never be kept. Sarah's theft had created a web of expectations and obligations that would devastate multiple family members when the truth emerged. "Uncle Robert, I assume she promised you money as well." He nodded reluctantly. $15,000 to help with the down payment on a fishing boat for my retirement. I already took out a loan against the promised money. The scope of Sarah's deception was staggering. She had not only stolen federal securities, but had also created a complex pyramid of financial promises that would collapse when her crimes were discovered. Our family members had made financial decisions based on her lies, creating additional victims of her fraudulent behavior. Has anyone actually seen legal documentation proving that Grandma Rose intended for me to share money with the family? I asked. The uncomfortable silence that followed answered my question. Sarah had manipulated their emotions and financial desperation without providing any credible evidence for her claims. "Sarah said you would try to discredit the documents," Mom interjected. "She warned us that you might claim they were fake to avoid sharing the money." The preemptive strike against my credibility showed Sarah's sophisticated understanding of manipulation tactics. She had anticipated my objections and prepared the family to dismiss any evidence that contradicted her narrative. "I want to see these supposed legal documents," I insisted. Mom produced another folder, this one containing what purported to be correspondence between our grandmother and her attorney, discussing her intentions for the money she had given me over the years. The letters were obviously forged with inconsistencies in handwriting, incorrect dates, and legal terminology that no elderly woman would have used in casual correspondence. "These are forgeries," I stated flatly. "Look at the signatures, the date formats, the legal language. Grandma Rose never wrote like this." "You are just saying that to protect your hoard," Uncle Robert accused. "Sarah showed us bank records proving the money came from estate accounts." "What bank records?" Jennifer handed me a stack of photocopied documents that appeared to show transfers from estate accounts to my personal savings account. But as I examined them more closely, I could see that the account numbers had been altered and the bank logos were slightly distorted, indicating digital manipulation. "These are also fake," I said. "The account numbers do not match any accounts I have ever owned, and these bank logos are wrong. Sarah has created an entire fictional narrative supported by forged documents." The family members exchanged uncertain glances as doubt began to creep into their certainty about Sarah's version of events. "Why would she lie about something this serious?" Aunt Patricia asked. Before I could answer, we heard footsteps on the stairs, and Sarah appeared in the living room doorway. Her eyes were red from crying, and she wore the wounded expression she had perfected during childhood to manipulate adults into sympathizing with her. "I heard my name," she said in a small, hurt voice. "Are you all talking about me behind my back?" "We are trying to understand why there are discrepancies in your documentation," I replied carefully. Sarah's expression immediately shifted to defensive anger. "Of course you would try to find problems with everything. You cannot stand the idea that you might have to share money with the family that raised you. Sarah, these documents are forgeries," I said, holding up the fake legal papers. "You created them to justify stealing my property." "I did not steal anything," she snapped. "That money belongs to the family, and you know it." The argument that followed revealed the extent to which our family had enabled Sarah's sense of entitlement over the years. Every time she had taken something that did not belong to her, our parents had found ways to justify her behavior or minimize the consequences. Every time someone had caught her in a lie, they had accepted her explanations rather than confronting the pattern of dishonesty that was now culminating in federal crimes. As I listened to the family rally around Sarah, despite the obvious evidence of her deception, I realized that this was not just about stolen bonds or forged documents. This was about a fundamental difference in values that had been building for years. My family prioritized loyalty and harmony over truth and accountability, while I had been trained by my work in federal service to value integrity and legal compliance above personal relationships. The meeting ended with an ultimatum from my parents: drop any consideration of involving law enforcement except Sarah's version of events, and agree to share the money according to her promises to various family members. If I refused, I would be banned from family gatherings and cut off from all contact with my relatives. As I watched my family file out of the house, united in their support of Sarah and their condemnation of my refusal to enable her criminal behavior, I understood that I was truly alone in this situation. The people I had trusted most in the world had chosen to protect lies rather than confront uncomfortable truths. 2 days after the family intervention, I was sitting at my laptop in my bedroom researching federal crime reporting procedures and trying to work up the courage to make the call that would formally involve law enforcement when I heard car doors slamming in our driveway. I looked out my window to see 2 people in dark suits walking up our front walkway with the measured pace and alert expressions of federal agents. My heart began pounding as I realized that Marcus had been correct about the automatic investigation triggers. The federal authorities had not waited for my report or complaint. Sarah's calls to multiple banks, combined with the suspicious circumstances surrounding her inquiries about redeeming securities registered to another person, had activated protocols that brought investigators to our door without any action on my part. I heard the doorbell ring, followed by Dad's voice answering the door with his usual gruff politeness. Then I heard a woman's voice identifying herself as Special Agent Diana Rodriguez with the FBI Financial Crimes Unit, followed by a man introducing himself as Agent Thomas Chen from the Treasury Department's Office of Inspector General. We need to speak with Sarah Mitchell and Becca Mitchell regarding an investigation into the attempted fraudulent redemption of federal securities. Agent Rodriguez explained in the calm, professional tone that immediately commanded attention. The silence that followed lasted nearly 10 seconds before I heard Dad call upstairs for Sarah and me to come down immediately. I took a deep breath, smoothed my hair, and walked downstairs to find my parents standing in the living room, looking pale and shocked while two federal agents waited with the patient confidence of people who held all the authority in the situation. Agent Rodriguez appeared to be in her early 40s with graying hair pulled back in a neat bun and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Agent Chen looked younger, perhaps in his 30s, with the athletic build and alert posture of someone accustomed to potentially dangerous situations. Both wore badges clipped to their suit jackets and carried themselves with the unmistakable bearing of federal law enforcement. Miss Mitchell. Agent Rodriguez addressed me directly. We understand that you are the registered owner of approximately $230,000 in federal Treasury securities that were reported missing during unauthorized redemption attempts. That's correct, I replied, my voice steadier than I had expected. Where is Sarah Mitchell? Agent Chen asked, consulting a small notebook. I am here. Sarah announced from the stairway where she had apparently been listening to the conversation. She walked into the living room with forced casualness, but I could see the fear in her eyes, despite her attempts to appear confident. Agent Rodriguez turned to face Sarah directly. Miss Sarah Mitchell, you are under investigation for the theft of federal property, attempted fraud, and conspiracy to commit identity theft. We need to ask you some questions about your recent contacts with financial institutions regarding the redemption of government securities. I want a lawyer, Sarah said immediately, the words tumbling out faster than she had probably intended. That is your right, Agent Chen replied. However, I should inform you that we have already obtained evidence of your activities from multiple sources. Banking institutions are required by federal law to report suspicious attempts to redeem government securities, and your calls to First National Bank Community Trust and Metropolitan Federal Bank have generated detailed incident reports. The color drained from Sarah's face as she realized that her attempts to research redemption procedures had created an electronic trail that led directly to her. I was just asking hypothetical questions. According to bank records, you specifically claim to have inherited Series 1 bonds and Treasury inflation-protected securities worth approximately $230,000. Agent Rodriguez continued. When asked to provide documentation supporting your inheritance claim, you stated that you were still gathering the necessary paperwork, but planned to return within a week to complete the redemption process. You also provided specific bond serial numbers during at least one of these conversations. Agent Chen added, serial numbers that match bonds registered to your sister Becca Mitchell, who is very much alive and has not transferred ownership of any securities to you. I watched Sarah's confident facade crumble as the agents methodically dismantled her belief that she could talk her way out of the situation. Federal investigators did not make accusations they could not prove, and they had clearly spent considerable time building a comprehensive case before arriving at our house. We have obtained a federal search warrant for this residence. Agent Rodriguez announced, producing an official document from her briefcase. We are authorized to search for and seize evidence related to the theft and attempted fraudulent redemption of federal securities, including any documents, electronic devices, or communications that may be relevant to this investigation. Dad stepped forward, his face flushed with anger and confusion. You cannot just search our house without permission. We have rights. Agent Chen handed him a copy of the search warrant. Sir, this document provides us with legal authorization to conduct a thorough search of the premises. You are welcome to review the warrant, but we will be proceeding with the search regardless of your cooperation. As if summoned by some invisible signal, additional federal agents began entering our house through the front door. They moved with efficient professionalism, photographing rooms, documenting evidence, and systematically searching areas where relevant materials might be concealed. Sarah Mitchell. Agent Rodriguez continued, "You are under arrest for theft of federal property conspiracy to commit fraud and attempted identity theft." The formal arrest was like watching a movie scene unfold in my childhood living room. Agent Chen read Sarah her Miranda rights, while Agent Rodriguez placed handcuffs on her wrists with practiced efficiency. Sarah began crying, but her tears seemed more related to anger and frustration than genuine remorse for her actions. "This is all a misunderstanding," she protested as the agents prepared to escort her from the house. "The money belongs to the family. Becca was hoarding it while everyone else struggled financially." "Ma'am, family disputes do not provide legal justification for theft of federal property," Agent Rodriguez replied matter-of-factly. "Your sister's personal financial decisions do not give you any legal right to steal government securities registered in her name." As Sarah was led away in handcuffs, I felt a complex mixture of relief, sadness, and dread. Relief that the investigation was finally underway and the stolen bonds would be recovered. Sadness that my sister had destroyed her future through criminal behavior. Dread about what the search of our house might reveal about the full scope of Sarah's illegal activities. The search lasted nearly 4 hours, during which agents discovered evidence that extended far beyond the theft of my bonds. They found forged identification documents with Sarah's photograph, but various names, fake Social Security cards, and computer files containing templates for creating fraudulent legal documents. Sarah's laptop revealed extensive research into identity theft techniques, government fraud schemes, and methods for converting stolen securities into untraceable cash. Miss Mitchell. Agent Chen addressed me as the search was concluding. "We found evidence suggesting that your sister has been involved in a broader pattern of fraud that may have victimized other people beyond yourself and your family members." Agent Rodriguez showed me printouts of Sarah's internet search history, which included queries about stealing from employers, forging government documents, and evading federal investigators. "Your sister appears to have been planning this theft for several months, possibly longer. We also found communications with individuals who may be part of an organized fraud network," Agent Chen added. "People who specialize in helping others convert stolen securities and government documents into cash for a percentage of the proceeds." The revelation that Sarah's theft was not an impulsive family dispute, but part of a calculated criminal enterprise, was devastating. She had not simply stolen my bonds because she needed college money. She had been systematically planning to commit federal crimes and had connected with other criminals who could help her profit from illegal activities. "We will need you to come to our field office tomorrow to provide a formal statement and help us understand the timeline of events leading up to the theft," Agent Rodriguez informed me. "Your cooperation will be essential for prosecuting this case and potentially preventing your sister from victimizing other people." As the federal agents finished their work and prepared to leave, I realized that my life had fundamentally changed. I was no longer just a Treasury Department analyst living temporarily with my parents after an apartment fire. I was now a federal crime victim and key witness in what appeared to be a complex fraud investigation involving multiple suspects and potentially numerous victims. My parents stood in the living room looking shell-shocked and confused, surrounded by the aftermath of a federal search that had transformed their understanding of their younger daughter, from college-bound student to federal criminal defendant. The house felt empty and violated, not just by the presence of law enforcement, but by the revelation that someone we loved had been planning to commit serious crimes under our own roof. The bonds I had worked so hard to accumulate were gone, seized as evidence in a federal case that might take months or years to resolve. My sister was in federal custody facing decades in prison. My family relationships were destroyed by conflict over loyalty versus accountability, and I was left to navigate the complex intersection of personal betrayal and professional responsibility that would define my life for the foreseeable future. The weeks following Sarah's arrest brought a cascade of consequences that extended far beyond the criminal investigation. I sat in the waiting room at Dr. Jennifer Walsh's medical office, my hands shaking slightly, as I held the appointment confirmation letter that would change my life in ways I was still struggling to comprehend. The routine physical examination I had scheduled weeks earlier had revealed something completely unexpected. I was 8 weeks pregnant. The father was David Hartman, my ex-fiancé, who had ended our engagement 6 months earlier, citing his need to focus on his family's expanding business empire and his reluctance to commit to marriage at such a young age. We had maintained an on-and-off romantic relationship even after the broken engagement, but I had not spoken to him since before Thanksgiving, when the complications surrounding the apartment fire and my temporary living situation had consumed most of my emotional energy. Dr. Walsh entered the examination room with the calm professionalism of someone who had delivered unexpected news to patients countless times before. The blood test confirms what we suspected, Becca. You are approximately 8 weeks pregnant. Have you given any thought to your options? The question felt overwhelming in the context of everything else happening in my life. My sister was in federal custody awaiting trial. My family relationships were destroyed. My career was under scrutiny due to the criminal investigation, and now I was facing single motherhood with a man who had already demonstrated his unwillingness to commit to our relationship. I need time to process this information, I replied, my voice barely steady. Of course, Dr. Walsh said gently. Take all the time you need, but you should know that you have excellent options for prenatal care if you decide to continue the pregnancy, and I can provide referrals for counseling services regardless of what you decide. After leaving the medical office, I sat in my car in the parking lot for nearly 20 minutes, trying to work up the courage to call David and inform him about the pregnancy. When I finally dialed his number, he answered on the first ring with the confident tone that had initially attracted me to him during college. Becca, I have been thinking about calling you. I heard about the situation with your sister on the news. Federal arrest for stealing government bonds. That must be incredibly stressful for your family. The casual way he mentioned Sarah's arrest as if it were neighborhood gossip rather than a devastating personal crisis set an uncomfortable tone for the conversation I needed to have with him. David, I need to tell you something important. I am pregnant. The silence that followed lasted nearly 15 seconds, during which I could hear him breathing and what sounded like voices in the background. How pregnant? He asked finally. 8 weeks. The baby would be due in late June. Another long pause followed by the sound of a door closing and the background noise disappearing. Becca, this is obviously unexpected for both of us. I think we should meet in person to discuss our options and how to handle this situation responsibly. The clinical way he referred to our potential child as a situation that needed to be handled responsibly gave me insight into his perspective that I found deeply troubling. But I agreed to meet him for dinner the following evening at a restaurant in downtown Richmond where we had celebrated my promotion to senior analyst position 2 years earlier. The restaurant held positive memories from a time when our relationship had seemed stable and promising, but the conversation we had that evening revealed how drastically our priorities had diverged during the months since our engagement ended. I have been following the news coverage of your sister's case, David began after we had ordered our meals. Federal prosecutors are talking about multiple charges and potential decades in prison. That kind of publicity is exactly what my family has been trying to avoid in relation to our business interests. I stared at him across the table, trying to process the fact that he was more concerned about his family's reputation than about the pregnancy or my emotional well-being during an incredibly difficult time in my life. David, your family's business reputation is not my primary concern right now. I am dealing with the potential destruction of my family, a federal criminal investigation, and an unplanned pregnancy. I need to know whether you are willing to be a supportive partner during this time." He leaned back in his chair and studied me with the calculating expression I had learned to recognize during our relationship whenever he was weighing costs and benefits rather than responding with genuine emotion. "Becca, I care about you and I want to do the right thing for everyone involved. But you have to understand that my family has significant business relationships with government contractors and financial institutions. Any association with a federal fraud investigation could damage those relationships in ways that affect hundreds of employees and millions of dollars in contracts." "What are you saying exactly?" I asked, though I was beginning to understand his position. "I am saying that if you are determined to pursue the prosecution of your sister and maintain your role as a key witness in this federal case, it creates complications for any future relationship we might have." The ultimatum was delivered with the polite ruthlessness that characterized David's approach to business negotiations, but applying that same cold calculation to our personal relationship and unborn child was more devastating than I had expected. "You want me to choose between seeking justice for crimes committed against me and maintaining a relationship with you? I want you to consider whether pursuing this case is really worth destroying your family relationships and limiting your future options," he replied. "My family has resources that could help you transition to a new career outside of government service. We could provide financial security for you and the baby without the stress and uncertainty of federal litigation." The offer was seductive in its promise of escape from the complicated consequences of Sarah's crimes, but it also required me to abandon my principles and enable criminal behavior by refusing to cooperate with the investigation. "What kind of financial security are you talking about?" I asked. David reached into his briefcase and produced a folder containing what appeared to be a formal legal settlement offer. $500,000 in a trust fund for the baby, plus $200,000 for your immediate expenses and relocation costs. In exchange, you would decline to testify in the federal case against your sister and sign a non-disclosure agreement about the circumstances surrounding the theft. The documents were professionally prepared by expensive attorneys, indicating that David and his family had been planning this offer since learning about my pregnancy. They had calculated the exact amount needed to make their proposal appealing, while ensuring my silence about crimes that could potentially embarrass them through association. "You want to pay me to let my sister escape consequences for federal crimes. I want to provide financial security for our child while helping you avoid years of legal complications and family conflict," he corrected. "Sarah made mistakes, but destroying her life with federal prison sentences will not undo those mistakes. Sometimes the wisest course is to focus on moving forward rather than dwelling on past problems." The conversation continued for another hour, during which David outlined his family's vision for our future, together relocation to a different state, new career opportunities outside of government service, comfortable financial arrangements that would eliminate money worries, and a quiet wedding that would provide legitimacy for our child without drawing attention to the circumstances surrounding the pregnancy. All of these benefits required only one compromise, allowing Sarah to escape federal prosecution by refusing to provide testimony that would be essential for her conviction. As I drove home from dinner, I realized that David's offer represented everything that was wrong with the enabling behavior that had allowed Sarah's criminal tendencies to develop unchecked. His family's wealth and influence could indeed protect Sarah from the consequences of her actions, but doing so would simply teach her that serious crimes could be resolved through money and connections rather than accountability and justice. The next morning brought additional complications that made David's offer even more tempting. I received a call from my supervisor at the Treasury Department informing me that my security clearance was being suspended pending the outcome of the federal investigation involving my family. The suspension was described as a routine precaution rather than evidence of wrongdoing on my part, but it effectively ended my ability to work in my current position and cast doubt on my future career prospects in government service. Becca, I want you to understand that this is not a reflection on your integrity or professional competence, my supervisor explained. But when federal employees become involved in criminal cases, even as victims, we have protocols designed to protect sensitive information and avoid conflicts of interest. The loss of my security clearance meant the loss of my salary health insurance and professional identity during the exact time when I needed stability most urgently. The timing of David's generous settlement offer seemed remarkably convenient, raising questions about whether his family had anticipated or even influenced the Treasury Department's decision to suspend my clearance. That evening, I received an unexpected visit from my former mentor, Dr. Elizabeth Warren, a senior economist who had guided my career development since I joined the Treasury Department. She appeared at my parents' front door with a bottle of wine and the kind concern of someone who had heard about my situation through professional networks. "I wanted to check on you and offer some perspective about the choices you are facing," she said as we sat in the living room where federal agents had conducted their search just weeks earlier. Dr. Warren had built her career on principles of economic justice and government accountability, and her reputation for integrity was legendary among Treasury Department employees. Her opinion on my situation would carry more weight than advice from anyone else in my professional circle. "I have heard about the settlement offer from the Hartman family," she said without preamble. Word travels quickly in Washington when wealthy families try to influence federal investigations. "How did you know about that?" I asked, surprised that confidential information had reached her so quickly. The Hartman family has a history of using financial settlements to resolve potentially embarrassing legal situations. They settled a similar case 3 years ago involving tax fraud allegations against one of their subsidiary companies. The pattern is well known among people who monitor government-contractor relationships. Dr. Warren's revelation that David's family had previously used money to avoid accountability for financial crimes added a disturbing dimension to their current offer. They were not offering to help me out of genuine concern for my welfare, but rather applying a proven strategy for protecting their business interests from association with criminal behavior. "What would you do in my situation?" I asked. "I would remember that personal integrity is not a commodity that can be purchased," she replied firmly. "Your testimony in this case is not just about seeking justice for crimes committed against you personally. It is about upholding the rule of law and protecting other potential victims from similar crimes in the future." As Dr. Warren prepared to leave, she handed me a business card for a nonprofit organization that provided support services for federal employees facing retaliation or pressure related to their cooperation with investigations. "Whatever you decide about the pregnancy and your relationship with David, do not let anyone convince you that justice is less important than convenience," she said. "Your sister committed serious crimes that threaten the integrity of federal financial systems. Your testimony could prevent her from victimizing other people and send a clear message that government securities are protected by law, not family connections." That night, I lay awake thinking about the choice between David's offer of comfortable compromise and Dr. Warren's challenge to maintain my principles, regardless of personal cost. The decision would determine not just my own future, but also the message sent to other potential criminals about whether federal crimes could be resolved through wealth and influence rather than accountability and justice. I was sitting in my bedroom reviewing the settlement documents David had given me and trying to work up the courage to make a decision when my phone rang with a call from Agent Rodriguez. Her voice carried an urgency that immediately captured my attention. "Miss Mitchell, we need to speak with you immediately. There has been a significant development in your sister's case that affects your safety and the integrity of our investigation." 20 minutes later, I was sitting in the FBI field office listening to Agent Rodriguez explain that Sarah had escaped from federal custody during what was supposed to be a routine medical transport to the Richmond General Hospital emergency room. "Your sister complained of severe abdominal pain during the night, and protocol required that she be evaluated by medical professionals," Agent Rodriguez explained. "During the transport, the vehicle was involved in what appeared to be a minor traffic accident. In the confusion following the collision, Sarah disappeared." Agent Chen activated a large monitor on the conference room wall and began displaying surveillance footage from various cameras along the route where the escape had occurred. We initially assumed this was an opportunistic escape, but further investigation has revealed evidence of coordination and planning. The first video showed the federal transport vehicle stopping at a red light approximately 2 miles from the hospital. A pickup truck approached from behind and deliberately rear-ended the federal vehicle, with enough force to deploy airbags and create chaos, but not enough to cause serious injuries. The timing and location of this collision were not random, Agent Chen continued. The pickup truck was stolen from a shopping center parking lot approximately 1 hour before the transport, and the driver abandoned the vehicle immediately after the collision. The second video from a traffic camera at the next intersection showed Sarah running from the disabled federal vehicle toward a dark sedan that was waiting with its engine running. The escape vehicle's license plate was obscured, and the windows were tinted too heavily to identify the occupants. This was a coordinated rescue operation, Agent Rodriguez stated. Someone with detailed knowledge of federal transport protocols and routes planned this escape. The question is who had access to that information and why they would risk additional federal charges to help Sarah evade prosecution. Agent Chen clicked to a new screen showing financial records and telephone logs. We traced the stolen pickup truck to a used car lot owned by Hartman Automotive, a subsidiary of Hartman Industries. We also found evidence of unusual phone calls between Sarah's defense attorney and representatives of the Hartman family legal team. My heart began pounding as I realized the implications of what the agents were telling me. David's family had not simply offered me a settlement to avoid embarrassment. They had actively participated in helping Sarah escape federal custody, which meant they had committed additional federal crimes in their attempt to protect their business reputation. We have surveillance footage from the car lot showing David Hartman himself driving the pickup truck that was used in the escape. Agent Rodriguez continued. He personally participated in the planning and execution of a federal prisoner escape. The betrayal cut deeper than anything Sarah had done to me. David had pretended to offer me a generous settlement out of concern for our unborn child, while simultaneously working to help my sister escape justice for her crimes. His entire approach to our relationship had been manipulative and dishonest. There is more, Agent Chen said, displaying additional surveillance footage. We believe Sarah and David have been communicating for several months, possibly since before her arrest. Phone records show numerous calls between Sarah's cell phone and numbers registered to David Hartman during the time period when she was planning the theft of your securities. The revelation that David had been involved in planning Sarah's crimes from the beginning transformed everything I thought I understood about the situation. He had not learned about the theft through news reports. He had been a co-conspirator from the early stages of the planning process. Why would David help Sarah steal from me? I asked, struggling to process the betrayal. Agent Rodriguez consulted her notes. We believe David's family business was facing significant financial difficulties that were not public knowledge. Government contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars were at risk due to potential fraud investigations involving their subsidiary companies. They needed liquid capital to resolve legal issues and maintain their business operations. Sarah's theft of your securities was intended to provide that capital, Agent Chen added. The plan was for Sarah to convert your bonds into cash, which would then be funneled through various accounts to Hartman Industries. In exchange, David would provide Sarah with enough money to pay for college and establish financial independence. The sophisticated nature of the conspiracy was staggering. My sister had not acted alone out of desperation or entitlement. She had been recruited by David's family as part of a larger scheme to steal government property and use the proceeds to resolve their own financial and legal problems. The settlement offer David made to you was part of their backup plan, Agent Rodriguez explained. If they could convince you to refuse cooperation with our investigation, Sarah would likely avoid conviction, and the stolen securities would eventually be returned to David's family control through various legal maneuvers. What about the escape? I asked. How does helping Sarah flee prosecution benefit them? Agent Chen displayed a map showing the route Sarah's escape vehicle had taken after leaving the accident scene. We believe they are planning to move her out of the country to a location where she cannot be extradited. With Sarah beyond the reach of federal prosecutors, the case against her becomes much more difficult to pursue, especially if you refuse to testify about the theft. The agents explained that David's family had connections to private security companies that specialized in helping wealthy individuals avoid legal consequences for criminal behavior. Moving Sarah to a non-extradition country would effectively end the federal investigation while protecting the Hartman family from further scrutiny of their business practices. "We need your help to locate Sarah and bring her back into federal custody," Agent Rodriguez requested. "Your knowledge of her childhood hiding place's favorite locations and behavioral patterns could be essential for tracking her down before she leaves the country." The request forced me to confront a fundamental choice between family loyalty and legal accountability that went beyond anything I had previously considered. Helping federal agents capture Sarah would make me directly responsible for her arrest and imprisonment, crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. "If I help you find Sarah, what happens to David?" I asked. "David Hartman will face federal charges for conspiracy prisoner escape theft of government property and potentially racketeering if we can prove his family's business was built on systematic criminal activity," Agent Chen replied. "He is looking at decades in federal prison regardless of what happens with Sarah's case." The man who had offered to provide financial security for our unborn child was himself facing the same kind of federal prosecution that he had asked me to help Sarah avoid. His promises of comfortable family life had been built on criminal behavior that was now collapsing under federal investigation. "I need time to think about this," I said. Agent Rodriguez nodded. "We understand this is difficult, but time is not on our side. Every hour that passes increases the likelihood that Sarah will successfully flee the country and escape accountability for her crimes." As I left the FBI field office, I realized that all of my options had been eliminated except the choice between justice and enabling. David's betrayal had removed the possibility of comfortable compromise, and Sarah's escape had raised the stakes beyond simple financial theft. Federal agents, not just my own conscience, were now asking me to choose between protecting criminals and upholding the rule of law. The pregnancy that had seemed like a complicating factor in my decision-making was now revealed to be part of a larger pattern of manipulation designed to pressure me into abandoning my principles. David had used our romantic history and our unborn child as leverage in a criminal conspiracy that treated me as an obstacle to be managed rather than a person deserving of honesty and respect. That evening, I sat in my childhood bedroom and thought about the lessons my parents had taught me about right and wrong before their judgment had been clouded by favoritism towards Sarah and desperation to avoid facing uncomfortable truths about her behavior. The values they had instilled in me during childhood demanded that I help bring criminals to justice, even when those criminals included people I had loved and trusted. I picked up my phone and called Agent Rodriguez. "I will help you find Sarah," I said. "But I have one condition. When this is over, I want protection for my unborn child from any retaliation by the Hartman family or their associates." "That can be arranged," Agent Rodriguez replied. "Where do you think we should start looking?" The cabin where we found Sarah had been her favorite hiding place during childhood, a rustic retreat in the Shenandoah Mountains that our family had rented for summer vacations when we were growing up. I remembered countless games of hide and seek where Sarah would disappear into the crawl space beneath the cabin's front porch, convinced that no one would think to look for her in such an obvious place. Her confidence in that hiding spot had been justified during childhood, but it proved to be her downfall when federal agents surrounded the cabin at dawn on a crisp December morning. Agent Rodriguez had assembled a team of 12 agents and U.S. Marshals for Sarah's recapture, treating the operation with the seriousness appropriate for someone who had escaped federal custody and was considered a flight risk. I watched from a surveillance van parked a half-mile away as agents moved into position around the cabin, their movements coordinated through radio communications and practiced tactical procedures. "We have visual confirmation of 2 individuals inside the cabin," came the report through our radio. "One matches the description of Sarah Mitchell, the other appears to be David Hartman." The sight of David at the cabin confirmed the agent's theory about his involvement in Sarah's escape, but it also provided the final piece of evidence needed to demonstrate the full scope of their conspiracy. He had not simply arranged her escape and provided financial support. He was personally involved in her attempt to flee prosecution, making himself an active participant in her continuing crimes. The arrest proceeded without violence or drama. Sarah and David surrendered when agents announced their presence and demanded compliance with federal warrants. Through the surveillance equipment, I watched my sister and former fiancé being led away in handcuffs, their months of planning and criminal conspiracy, ending in a mundane capture that reflected the ultimate futility of trying to evade federal law enforcement. The trial that followed consumed 8 months of my life, during which I testified extensively about the theft of my securities, David's attempts to pressure me into dropping charges, and the family dynamics that had enabled Sarah's criminal behavior to escalate unchecked. The prosecution presented a compelling case that demonstrated how my sister's theft had been part of a larger conspiracy involving the Hartman family's systematic use of criminal activity to resolve financial problems and avoid accountability for business fraud. Sarah was ultimately convicted on 17 federal charges, including theft of government property, conspiracy to commit fraud, escape from federal custody, and racketeering. The judge sentenced her to 18 years in federal prison, noting that her crimes had threatened the integrity of government financial systems and demonstrated a pattern of criminal behavior that required substantial incarceration to protect the public. David received a slightly lighter sentence of 12 years in federal prison for his role in the conspiracy, but the judge's remarks during sentencing emphasized the particularly egregious nature of his crimes. He had used his romantic relationship with me as cover for criminal activity, manipulated my pregnancy as leverage for avoiding prosecution, and abused his family's wealth and connections to obstruct federal justice. The Hartman family business empire collapsed under the weight of federal investigation and criminal convictions. Government contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars were canceled, business licenses were revoked, and assets were seized to pay restitution to victims of their various fraudulent schemes. The family's attempts to use wealth and influence to avoid accountability had ultimately destroyed the business empire they had tried to protect. My own life underwent dramatic changes during and after the trial. The Treasury Department not only reinstated my security clearance, but promoted me to the Fraud Investigation Division, where my experience as a crime victim provided valuable insight into the psychological and financial impact of federal securities theft. My work investigating similar cases helped prevent other families from experiencing the betrayal and manipulation that had characterized my own situation. The baby girl I delivered in June was healthy and beautiful with dark hair and expressive eyes that reminded me daily of the importance of creating a better world for the next generation. I named her Grace, partly for the unmerited favor I had received during the most difficult period of my life, and partly as a reminder that redemption and healing were possible even after profound betrayal. My parents underwent a transformation that was painful but ultimately healing. The evidence presented during the trial forced them to confront years of enabling behavior that had contributed to Sarah's criminal development. They enrolled in family therapy and gradually learned to distinguish between love and accountability, understanding that their previous approach to protecting Sarah had actually harmed her by preventing her from learning necessary lessons about consequences and responsibility. Mom's first genuine apology came during a therapy session 8 months after Sarah's conviction. "Becca, I realize now that we failed both of our daughters. We failed Sarah by teaching her that rules did not apply to her, and we failed you by asking you to enable criminal behavior for the sake of family harmony. Dad's acknowledgement took longer, but it was equally heartfelt when it finally came. I spent so many years believing that family loyalty meant protecting each other from consequences. I did not understand that real love sometimes requires allowing people to face the results of their choices. The financial recovery was more straightforward than the emotional healing. The federal court ordered full restitution for my stolen securities, plus interest and penalties that brought the total recovery to nearly $300,000. Additionally, the seizure of Hartman family assets resulted in a victim compensation fund that provided additional financial security for Grace's future education and my transition to single parenthood. The community response to the case was overwhelmingly supportive once the full scope of the conspiracy became public knowledge. Media coverage shifted from sensationalizing family conflict to celebrating the importance of integrity and courage in protecting government institutions from criminal exploitation. I received hundreds of letters from federal employees and ordinary citizens expressing gratitude for my willingness to pursue justice despite personal cost. One of the most meaningful developments was the establishment of new Treasury Department protocols for protecting employees who become victims of securities fraud. The policies I helped develop ensure that government workers who report crimes receive appropriate support and protection rather than suspension and career damage. These changes will help future victims avoid the professional retaliation that complicated my own situation. Sarah's time in federal prison has been marked by genuine rehabilitation efforts that offer hope for her eventual redemption. She completed her GED, enrolled in vocational training programs, and began participating in counseling sessions that address the entitlement and manipulation patterns that contributed to her criminal behavior. Her letters to me, which began arriving 2 years after her conviction, demonstrate growing understanding of the harm she caused and genuine remorse for her actions. 3 years after the trial concluded, I met Jonathan Pierce, an ethics attorney who specializes in government accountability cases. Our relationship developed slowly and was built on mutual respect for integrity and justice, rather than the romantic manipulation that had characterized my relationship with David. Jonathan's work defending whistleblowers and corruption victims gave him deep appreciation for the choices I had made during the federal investigation. Our wedding last spring was a celebration of second chances and the possibility of building relationships on foundations of honesty and shared values. Grace, now 4 years old, served as an enthusiastic flower girl and has embraced Jonathan as the father figure she never had from David. Our family represents the kind of redemption and healing that becomes possible when people choose accountability over convenience and truth over comfortable lies. The house where Sarah and I grew up has been restored and renovated, funded by restitution payments and my improved financial situation. Mom and Dad have learned to take pride in my professional accomplishments and Grace's development, understanding that their family's reputation is built on integrity rather than on protecting each other from consequences. Sarah's earliest possible release date is still 8 years away, but she has expressed genuine desire to rebuild relationships with family members and contribute positively to society after completing her sentence. Her transformation in prison suggests that consequences rather than enabling were ultimately what she needed to address the behavioral patterns that led to criminal activity. The impact of the case extends beyond our family to broader questions about government security and white-collar crime prosecution. Federal investigators have used techniques developed during Sarah's case to identify and prosecute other securities fraud schemes, preventing millions of dollars in additional theft and protecting the integrity of government financial systems. My work at the Treasury Department has evolved to include training programs for federal employees about recognizing and reporting financial crimes. The personal experience of victimization provides credibility and insight that helps other government workers understand their responsibilities to protect public resources and report criminal activity, even when it involves family members or personal relationships. Grace attends an excellent private school funded by the Victim Compensation Recovery, and her college education is secured through properly invested funds that will provide her with opportunities that were threatened by the criminal conspiracy that surrounded her conception. She knows age-appropriate versions of the story about courage and justice that brought our family together, and she takes pride in having a mother who chose to do the right thing even when it was difficult. The life lesson that emerged from this ordeal extends far beyond the specifics of securities fraud or family dysfunction. When faced with choices between convenience and integrity, between loyalty and justice, between comfort and courage, the decisions we make define not just our own character, but the kind of world we create for future generations. Personal integrity is not a luxury that can be set aside when circumstances become challenging. It is the foundation upon which trust, security, and justice depend in any civilized society. True family relationships are built on honesty, respect, and accountability, rather than blind loyalty that enables destructive behavior. Love sometimes requires allowing people to face consequences for their actions, because protection from accountability ultimately prevents growth, learning, and redemption. The most loving thing I could do for Sarah was to ensure that she faced justice for her crimes, even though that justice was painful for everyone involved. The courage to stand up against corruption and criminal behavior, even when it involves people we love, ultimately protects not just our own integrity, but the broader community of people who depend on the rule of law for security and justice. My testimony helped convict criminals, prevent additional crimes, and strengthen government systems that protect public resources and national security. Now, as I watch Grace playing in the backyard of our restored family home, surrounded by the love and stability that came from choosing truth over comfortable lies, I understand that the most important inheritance I can give her is not money or property, but the example of a life lived with integrity and the knowledge that justice and healing are always possible even after profound betrayal. The path from victim to advocate, from betrayal to redemption, from family destruction to family healing, required courage that I did not know I possessed until circumstances demanded it. But the strength to do the right thing, even when it costs everything we think we value, exists within all of us. When we remember that our choices define not just our own lives, but the kind of world we leave for those who come after us. What would you do if someone you loved asked you to choose between family loyalty and doing what you know is right? Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between protecting someone's feelings and protecting the truth? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe for more stories about courage and justice, and share it with someone who might need to hear about the importance of integrity in difficult situations. Thank you for taking this journey with me, and I hope you find the courage to always choose what is right, even when it is hard. Until next time, may your choices reflect the values you want to see in the world.